Welcome to Don't Die Dumb, the channel that makes you smarter with every video. Today, we're exploring some of the most bizarre scientific experiments ever conducted. Did you know that researchers once conditioned a child to fear fluffy animals? Or that a famous physicist imagined a cat that was both alive and dead at the same time? These strange and sometimes controversial experiments have shaped our understanding of science in surprising ways. Buckle up as we dive into the weirdest experiments ever conducted. Let's kick things off with one of the most infamous psychology experiments ever conducted, the Stanford prison experiment. Picture this, 1971, the basement of Stanford University transformed into a mock prison. College students, just ordinary folks like you and me, volunteered for a study, randomly assigned roles as either guards or prisoners. They figured, hey, let's run this for 2 weeks and see what happens. Within days, the guards, empowered by their roles, began exhibiting increasingly abusive behavior towards the prisoners. The prisoners, on the other hand, started showing signs of severe emotional distress, succumbing to the pressures of their manufactured reality. The experiment, initially slated for 2 weeks, had to be abruptly halted after just 6 days. The ethical implications were simply too much to bear. The Stanford prison experiment sent shockwaves through the scientific community and beyond. It starkly revealed how quickly and easily people can internalize roles, especially in environments where power dynamics are at play. It made everyone question, are we inherently good, or can external factors turn us into, well, not so good versions of ourselves? This experiment forced a major rethink of ethics in psychological research. Fast forward to 1961, we've got another mind-blowing experiment, this time from psychologist Stanley Milgram. This experiment was all about exploring obedience to authority. And let me tell you, the results were downright shocking. You're told to administer electric shocks to a learner for wrong answers. The shocks increase in intensity with each mistake. The learner is an actor and there are no real shocks. You start delivering shocks, the voltage increasing. The learner starts grunting, then yelling, then pleading for you to stop. You feel uncomfortable, but the authority figure tells you to continue. The Milgram experiment revealed the unsettling power of authority on our actions. Now let's journey back to 1920, to the time of John B. Watson and Rosalie Rayner, two psychologists who conducted an experiment that would spark intense debate for years to come, the Little Albert experiment. This experiment centered around classical conditioning, the idea that you can learn to associate a neutral stimulus with a specific response. In this case, the subject was a 9-month-old baby, Little Albert. Albert, like most babies, was initially curious about a white rat they presented to him. He showed no fear, wanting to play with the furry creature. But then, the researchers introduced a new element. Every time Little Albert reached for the rat, they would strike a steel bar behind him, creating a loud, jarring noise. After repeated pairings of the rat and the loud noise, Little Albert began to associate the two. The rat, once a source of curiosity, became a trigger for fear. The Little Albert experiment, while demonstrating the principles of classical conditioning, immediately came under fire for its ethical implications. Deliberately inducing fear and distress in a young child raised a whole host of questions about the limits of scientific inquiry. The study sparked a huge debate about the responsibility researchers have towards their subjects, especially when those subjects are children. Chapter 4. Pavlov's dog experiment, drool, bells, and the dawn of behavioral psychology. Let's rewind the clock to the early 1900s and step into the laboratory of Ivan Pavlov, a Russian physiologist who stumbled upon a groundbreaking discovery while studying digestion in dogs. Pavlov noticed something peculiar during his experiments. The dogs in his study, they weren't just salivating when they were presented with food, which you'd expect, right? They were also starting to drool before the food even arrived, like they were anticipating their meal. Pavlov observed that the dogs would begin salivating at the mere sight of the lab assistant who usually fed them, or even at the sound of the assistant's footsteps approaching. Intrigued, Pavlov decided to investigate this phenomenon further. He designed an experiment where he would ring a bell, a neutral stimulus, just before presenting the dogs with food. He repeated this pairing of the bell and the food multiple times, and guess what? The dogs? They started associating the sound of the bell with the arrival of food. Eventually, it got to the point where the dogs would salivate at the sound of the bell alone, even if no food was present. Pavlov's experiment introduced the concept of classical conditioning to the world, showing how a neutral stimulus, when paired with a biologically significant stimulus, can elicit a learned response. Chapter 5: Schrodinger's Cat, a Quantum Conundrum. Now let's dive headfirst into the mind-boggling world of quantum mechanics with one of the most famous thought experiments of all time, Schrodinger's cat. This thought experiment, dreamed up by physicist Erwin Schrödinger in 1935, isn't about a real cat, but rather a way to illustrate the strange and counterintuitive nature of quantum mechanics. So picture this. A cat, just your average everyday feline, is placed inside a sealed box. Now this isn't just any box, it's a special box equipped with a few peculiar items. Inside the box, along with the cat, there's a radioactive atom, a Geiger counter, which detects radiation, and a vial of poison. The radioactive atom has a 50-50 chance of decaying within an hour. If it does decay, the Geiger counter will detect the radiation and trigger a mechanism that releases the poison, killing the cat. If the atom doesn't decay, well, the cat lives to meow another day. According to quantum mechanics, until we open the box and observe what's going on inside, the cat exists in a state called superposition. This means that the cat is both alive and dead at the same time. Schrodinger's cat highlights the bizarre nature of the quantum world, where particles can exist in multiple states simultaneously until we observe them, collapsing the superposition into a single state. Chapter 6: The Monster Study, a Stain on Speech Therapy. Now, for a truly disturbing chapter in the history of scientific experiments, we turn to the monster study conducted in 1939 by speech pathologist Wendell Johnson. This experiment, infamous for its cruelty and lasting impact on its subjects, targeted a group of 22 orphan children, all residing at a facility in Iowa. Johnson, obsessed with proving that stuttering was a learned behavior, devised a cruel experiment to test his hypothesis. He divided the children into two groups. One group received positive speech therapy, where they were encouraged, praised for their fluency, and treated with warmth and respect. The other group, however, endured a horrific experience. These children, some of whom had no prior speech impediments, were subjected to constant belittling and criticism of their speech. They were told they stuttered, labeled as slow and tongue-tied. Many of the children in the negative speech therapy group, even those who had perfectly normal speech before the experiment, developed speech problems that persisted throughout their lives. The monster study, hidden from the public eye for decades, stands as a chilling reminder of the ethical boundaries that should never be crossed in the name of science. It's a stark lesson in the responsibility we have to protect vulnerable populations from harm and to prioritize the well-being of individuals above all else. Chapter 7: The Human Radiation Experiments, a dark chapter in scientific history. Our final, and perhaps most unsettling experiment, takes us back to a period between the 1940s and 1970s, a time when the United States government conducted a series of secret experiments involving the exposure of unsuspecting citizens to radioactive substances. These experiments, now collectively known as the human radiation experiments, remain a dark stain on the history of scientific research. These experiments, shrouded in secrecy, were carried out on a diverse group of individuals, including pregnant women, children, and terminally ill patients. The researchers, driven by a desire to understand the effects of radiation on the human body, often failed to obtain informed consent from their subjects. Imagine being one of these unsuspecting participants. You're told you're receiving medical treatment, but in reality, you're being injected with plutonium, fed radioactive isotopes, or exposed to high levels of radiation without your knowledge or consent. The health consequences for many of these individuals were dire, leading to cancers, birth defects, and other radiation-related illnesses. The human radiation experiments, when they finally came to light in the 1990s, sparked widespread outrage and condemnation. The revelations of these experiments led to congressional hearings, apologies from the government, and a complete overhaul of ethical guidelines for human experimentation. That's it for today. We hope you found these bizarre scientific experiments as fascinating and sometimes disturbing as we did. If you enjoyed the video, give us a thumbs up and subscribe to Don't Die Dumb so you don't miss any of our upcoming episodes. Have a favorite experiment or a topic you want us to cover? Let us know in the comments. Until next time, stay smart and stay curious.